Hi everybody, Cody here from Spiritual Healing and Expansion. And today I wanted to address a very good question. Somebody had wrote in and said, "Hey Cody, I was wondering if you would care to touch on this subject. How do you recognize codependency in our relationships, especially with a baby, where we're supposed to be a team? How do you tell teamwork apart from codependency?" Well, I want to say that this is an absolutely incredible question because I think the term codependency really gives people the wrong idea, and it really needs to be renamed, in my opinion, because codependency really doesn't have to do with depending on another person. In fact, depending on somebody else is actually not a bad thing at all. It's a natural thing. You know, we all depend on each other to make decisions for the whole, so that the collective or the whole, so that we can have a functionality in our lives and in society. I think that, we have valued independency to such a fault that it has created the illusion of separation. It's important to remember that we are all one. So when you're truly dependent on somebody else, you're still dependent on yourself in a way, okay? So let's first scratch the idea that being dependent on somebody else is a bad thing. And this codependency thing, we're going to dive into that and really, I'm going to explain to you what codependency is, so that you can tell the difference between codependency and just, being dependent on somebody in a natural way. It's important in our relationships to be able to depend on the other person for needs that need to be met. We don't, one-sided relationships are never healthy. So it's really important that we have an equal balance there. So, depending on your spouse for help with a child is a natural thing, especially nowadays where, we have the females and males both in the working environment. It is important that we can keep that balance and just be a team player. That's a natural thing. Now, codependency is a little bit different. Codependency stems from a dysfunctional childhood, usually. And this child usually grows up in an environment where they tend to become the peacekeeper. They're the person who's always holding the fort down, always really attuned to what's going on around them, so that they can be very sure not to trigger stress in somebody else or to cause any ripples in their living environment. And they tend to put other people's needs before their self. So a lot of the times when we grow up, especially in dysfunction, we're taught that our needs are not important. So what happens is that we break ourselves off from our needs, and instead we meet everybody else's needs, thinking that we're meeting our own, but forgetting that we actually have our very own needs that need met. And that other people's needs actually they should come secondary to your needs being fulfilled first. So this is a really, this is a dynamic that's super common with dysfunctional families. They put a lot of responsibility on the other people around them, usually because they have this issue as well. So, the parent typically doesn't have very good boundaries, and they are not completely emotionally stable themselves. So it brushes off onto the kids. The kids take the burden for it, and they become the peacekeeper, somebody who is always trying to bend over backwards, even if it means that their needs aren't being met, just so that they can keep the peace in the household. Codependency also is characterized by a few things. There's poor personal boundaries or no boundaries at all. This goes along with people pleasing as well. So, if there's something that, let's say a friend asks you to take them somewhere, but you have a lot of work to do and you don't really have the time to take them. And instead what you do is you know deep down that you don't want to, and you have all this stuff going on, but you're like, yeah, sure, I'll go ahead and do whatever it is that you need me to do, to make that other person happy. It's called people pleasing, and it is putting your needs last by putting other people's needs before your own. So they also have a poor sense of identity, and a lot of this has to do with our needs not being met and not being able to express our needs, because when we are not allowed to express our own needs, our needs are a part of us. So we tend to have a poor, shaky identity of who we really are, because we have been told who we should be, that our needs are not important, to bend anything that we need to make sure that other people are happy, which is a recipe for disaster. So codependency also, codependents tend to need people to act a certain way because they have poor personal boundaries. So they kind of feel, they kind of act in a way that other people are extensions of them. So they have a really shaky personal boundary on where the other person stops and where they stop and the other person begins. So let's say, somebody is getting irritated around them. The codependent might be fearful and do anything that they possibly can to make that other person happy, because they kind of feel that anger and stuff as well. They are trying to ward off other people's emotions because of their own boundaries, not being able to decipher where one starts and one begins. So that is another characteristic of codependency. So let's see, I took some notes. A lot of the time, a codependent has a lot of low self-worth. And the reason for that, again, is because when we are growing up in dysfunctional households and we are making sure that other people are always happy, versus, even if it puts our happiness, on the back burner, what happens is we don't develop a healthy self-worth. Codependent people tend to, like, when you're putting other people first all the time, your self-worth goes down the drain because you feel that other people are more important than you. You feel that the peace of the household should be more important than your own peace. You feel the happiness of everybody else around you is more important than your own happiness. A lot of the times codependents have a hard time really understanding who they are. And a lot of the times they're also empaths. They're empaths that are disempowered. So the empowered empath is the person who can walk into the room, feel the energy, and be very keen to how other people, to their emotions and what they're feeling and what they're going through without absorbing that. So absorbing the energy around is a sign of a lack of personal boundaries. And then when a person observes instead of absorbs, but they feel, they can still sense it, and they have a very good understanding for what's going on, and they can feel deeply for that other person as an empath, but they don't absorb the energy of the other person, then that is the empowered empath, okay? So it's really important to remember that, this word codependency really needs to be changed to something else. I think that there's already something that people have been calling it. Let me think about what it's called. Self-love deficiency disorder. I think that's what they're calling it. But all in all, again, I'm not somebody who believes in labels and that type of thing. They are helpful so that we can lump, symptoms together so that we can see what's going on. But codependency, the term alone, is a very misleading term. It makes you feel like you shouldn't be dependent on other people, which is not true. You should definitely allow yourself to have that, because this idea of independency, like I said earlier, is the illusion, creates an illusion that we are all separate from one another, and that we don't need other people to help us, and that's just not true. And to live a life that way is very disempowering, and it puts a lot of pressure on a single person. It almost puts the weight of the world on your shoulders when you're going around thinking that you need to be super interdependent, where you you don't depend on anybody for anything. However, this should not be confused with being able to meet your own needs first. So it's really important that you figure out what your needs are, and then be able to meet those needs and not necessarily rely on the other person to do that. Now, if they are able to do that and you are super content with that and it doesn't disempower you, then that's totally fine. But the moment that it becomes disempowering, where you have to like literally rely on somebody else for your happiness and for your needs to be met, otherwise you cannot function properly, that is when it becomes a problem, okay? So I hope this helped you out. There's really, really a lot to codependency, and I really just kind of scraped the surface here because, you know, I just for the lack of, or the, you know, for the lack of time, and really wanting to just, you know, get to the point here with no fluff and digging way too deep. I wanted to be able to just kind of outline for you what the differences between being codependent is, and being interdependent. So the line between codependency in a relationship and just being, you know, dependent in a healthy way is that it would be unhealthy for you. So if it's unhealthy for you, you'll definitely be able to tell. It'll feel very disempowering. You will feel like you need that other person. Otherwise you won't be able to survive, that type of thing. So I hope this helped you out, and it was a very great question. I really love to answer these questions for you guys, and I would love for you to keep them coming as they show up. So I hope this was helpful, and you guys are having an incredible, incredible day today. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.